Hey everybody. So after yesterday where I talked about the Webster Award, my DragonCon schedule, what's going on with Book 2 and the paper crisis, print delays, I got a lot of questions asked in my private Discord as well as some through other social media DM channels about what's going on with the industry, if I had any thoughts about stuff, what I could share. And so this is just a direct response to that. So, at least in terms of my book, part of the reason it's not coming out this October, which is when it was supposed to, is there have been so many delays out of my control in the publishing industry. Part of that being print and paper issues, right? This ties into COVID. 80% of the industries, or at least a vast majority, I don't know what the number is anymore, used to come from China. It probably still does. And this is all just based on trade agreements, right? That the industry has where it sources stuff. And obviously, because of COVID, a lot of that's been hampered for years now. And COVID also forced the industry to change how they do a lot of their publication payments for authors through advances. Which, if you're a booktuber reviewer, you've probably seen authors talk about this if you follow them on social media. I don't know how many reviewers key into this and know or care, but contracts for a lot of authors have been getting tougher and worse, not necessarily in our favor. And yeah, so a lot of those delays are based on that because I'm one of the few authors right now who've come in new to the traditional side that have gotten to write an epic fantasy of epic scale in terms of size. I believe the first binding was like the largest book that came out its respective year, and it's one of the largest debuts just in the last handful of years. I'm one of the few people allowed to, and it was probably because I signed it just before COVID. And I am being affected obviously by that, by what I'm allowed to do in terms of print size for my story, and then the sourcing paper and stuff. So yeah, there's just a lot of delays out of my control, unfortunately, because as I've stated, and I publicly was on record in July 2022, I turned in the original draft of book 2 before book 1 even came out. And we've mostly been just dealing with that and what's going to happen with the final version so I can move on to writing book 3. And then other aspects of the industry I guess I want to talk about because people have been asking is what's going on with certain acquisition and buying patterns because certain books are getting talked about more and they're getting popular. Is that going to affect things? And the answer is just yes. The publishing industry is not different than any other industry where we've seen the sweep of Hollywood movies that have gone heavily to the superhero trend, right? And as a comic fan, obviously I love that, but at the same time, there's always consequences. We've seen people talk about how it's harder to get certain kinds of cinema made because they're not the blockbuster Hollywood movie. And in terms of sourcing and support, probably, I don't know the aspect of getting producer money, like how that works in Hollywood, so I can't comment on it. There's just a lot of public evidence of it's just harder for them to, make the big blockbusters be non superhero movies unless they're already extremely famous IPs, right? Like a Mission Impossible movie, Tom Cruise doing Top Gun, and how much of that is also the fact that it's Tom Cruise, right? Arguably the last great movie star in terms of what the words movie star can actually come to encompass and mean. And the traditional industry is going through some of that too right now, where people who pay attention have been noticing the sweep of romantic fantasy or romantasy, as it's being truncated to. And I can give some anecdotal evidence, and this is not a criticism, by the way, of romantasy. The industry going through stuff like this is completely normal. I don't know if people understand that. There seems to be a lot of I guess, not necessarily umbrage, but just some taken aback at the push for this within the industry. But it's the same thing with the retelling craze, right? Traditional publishing has never historically actually set trends. They chase them. It's just the idea that you think they set trends. But in the 60s, there was a period where SF particularly became ghettoized, where it was just put in the ghetto of it's not cool, we're not buying it as much. And there's a list of classic authors from that time, and you can go and find their interviews, including Wikipedia articles with sources that will show that SF authors for a time turned to writing other genres that are more lucrative or evergreen, right? Like thrillers and romance historically are the most solid genres, and there's reasons for that. I don't want to get into all the psychology of that and buyer patterns. It is fascinating, and we can talk about that for Romantassy. But then you had the '90s fantasy boom, where a little bit before that, epic fantasy wasn't as cool, and then we had Robert Jordan come out and blow the doors off everybody. And on the heels of that, I believe a lot of publishers were trying to emulate that and engineer that success where they could. And you had Terry Goodkind's series, which I can't comment on. I've never read it. and then Game of Thrones came out, or yeah, Song of Fire and Ice, right? Ice and Fire. It came out late 90s. And then we had the whole boom in the mid 2000s of urban fantasy, especially exacerbated by TV shows that were in the paranormal, supernatural vein that made it even cooler, right? We had a huge boom of UF authors taking off in the early 2000s, carrying up until late like 2010, 11, 12 for a while. Some of the biggest names are still around. The YA genre specifically had the whole boom of the dystopian YA books, right? Post Hunger Games, especially. And it's just normal. Usually there's also like world factors, like, right, when Game of Thrones blew up, the world was sort of okayer, and Grimdark was fun. And for a while, there was a lot of Grimdark acquisitions on the heels of Game of Thrones, like critical international success through TV, especially. And right now, if you look at the world, what we've been going through, post-COVID era, all the economic issues that followed with that. We've got wars happening in other countries, socio-political issues, inflation of all different kinds, romantic fantasy, and then obviously cozy fantasy, which has been taking up a lot of bandwidth right now in publishing because of the popularity of it. They offer a kind of surcease to people, right? It's what fiction's supposed to be about. It's escapism and ways to confront things or find comfort, depending on what you need. Like horror is going through a bit of a boom right now, and part of that is because horror offers you a way safely to confront terrifying things, which, given the state of the world right now, makes logical sense. And then romantic fantasy and cozy offer a different kind of comfort and emotional catharsis, which is why, I guess I did circle back to this, why thrillers and romance have always been like the evergreen genres. Thrillers usually have some kind of character you can root for. Either they're hyper competent, which, is, you can argue is wish fulfillment. I think that's kind of a negative take on it, but like, that's why we like superheroes in a way too, right? But there's usually that tie into it, as well as the fact or seeing someone become hyper competent. If they're in a downtrodden situation, or abused, they represent, the feeling of powerlessness that people have in certain conditions and times in the world. A great example is Walter White's character in Breaking Bad, who's not necessarily a good human, but he's sympathetic in terms of why people like him, and you see what he's gone through in his life. And him doing the right thing in every situation has only cost him. And he ends up doing horrible things for reasons that people can at least understand, and in some cases sympathize with, even if they're not necessarily good reasons. And romance offers a different kind of catharsis and comfort too, right? And there's also the familiarity in the romance genre of that it's very famously hyper formulaic. You really know what you're going to get at the end of the day. Maybe the milieu or the setting changes, but in many cases you're reading the same book, and that's not a criticism, right? That's part of why romance readers go in for that, and they like what they like. And that's all that's really happening right now in the industry is romantasy is just what people like. And there's a lot of different reasons for that, and it's selling hyper well. So yeah, there are going to be some side effects of this. Some that we can talk about and have been publicly talked about already are foreign publishers and acquisitions. Wesley Chu did a tweet recently that I don't know how many people commented on it. I just remember what I saw, and other authors weighed in about either one of the largest or the largest epic fantasy publisher in Germany is cutting back severely on their epic fantasy acquisitions and translations, and the comments indicated it's mostly in lieu of favor for romantic fantasy or romantasy. I can only comment what I've personally been told through business conversations, and I've been told something similar, that a lot don't want to acquire the epic because of the paper costs right now. You add in the translation costs to that size, it's strictly monetary. And romantic fantasy is selling so well, it's very popular overseas, and then you can also print it in most cases cheaper, right? They're not as large books as epic fantasy, so you're going to have lower translation costs, you're going to have lower print costs, and you can make a ton of money through the volume of sales. That's valid from the business side of things. It just means there unfortunately probably is still going to be some negative effect on the epic in terms of like the giant doorstopper epic, right? And those have their fans. People are never going to obviously write smaller books and blah blah and this and that, and that's both valid and invalid because it's a career in the arts. Part of this is also being able to do what you love and like, and that comes through in the page. And in a world of 8 billion, it's absolutely arrogant to assume that you wrote something that nobody will like. Nobody is that unique and special, not to be negative. I think it's actually a beautiful thing, but that in terms of your tastes are your own, that's not true. Your tastes are probably shared with millions of people. And it's objectively the point of the publishing industry to help you find those people, because that's how your books sell to like-minded people who want that, and then everyone makes money. But in terms of what's going on between like my book and places in the industry and just some questions people had, because I'm in an interestingly privileged spot, I guess, to be both traditionally published, and I've been indie for so long, so I've seen how trends and things go in that sphere as well. And I don't want to ramble and turn this into indie versus trad thing, or how trends go between both, because they're actually starting to become linked, and that's a fascinating topic to me. I'll keep that for another time, but I hope this just helps people understand like some things you might expect. I actually think Romantassy is going to get bigger for a while, because, and this is the point I'll probably end on, that as blowing up as it is right now, with names like Sarah J. Maas, Jennifer Armentrout, newer names that I'm unfortunately not familiar with, that are probably just fantastic writers and killing it. And then the recent one that just, took all the bookstores by storm. The author of Fourth Wing, right? I know, doing some basic market research, that their pre-orders for book 2, both an ebook and I believe it was either paperback or hardcover, I don't know the second format, but it's 2 formats, are in the top 100 on Amazon, which is the world's largest retailer. And that's just indicative of like some of the biggest names. But because those sales usually are what a lot of people in marketing consider, that's going to drive acquisitions. And no acquisitions made even this year will come out next year. You'll be very lucky to have a 1-year turnaround, right? It's going to probably be 2 years, 3 years for some. That means, as hot as this is, people selling now won't debut for years. And there's 2 ways that can go. We're going to have a year or 2 of non-stop Romantassy books coming out, which will further drive the craze. Or something could happen between then, right? That's how genre shifts work. God knows what might debut that's crazy and just changes everybody's mind. And it's an unfortunate and just real reality we all have to deal with in the industry. Yeah, my take isn't good or bad. It's just one of those, like, this is normal. The industry's always gone through trends. Every art industry always has. And yeah, I guess the only guarantee that we have is like the readers who love our work, and we'll keep talking about it. And that's not bittersweet to me or negative. It's just one of the things in the industry. I'm fortunate in that the first binding has been doing very well by my understanding of the metrics that I have seen and that I'm supposed to be hitting. And I'm very grateful to everyone who finds this video and has supported the book, likes it, loves it, has talked about it. And I guess just on that, I'll end with what I'm doing in terms of that universe. I'm currently working on an Ari novella that will take place at the end of book 1's past story. So I'm not going to spoil that for people who haven't read it, but where his past story ends and before his past story begins in book 2. So there's going to be a little intermission gap of a period of 2 to 3 weeks, and Ari's novella will take place during that period. And for anyone who's read the Shola short story that I released this year in a charity anthology, Instinct, which was a self-published anthology where we were very fortunate to have big names like Patricia Briggs, Shauna McGuire, Jim Butcher, and Faith Hunter donate stories. I wrote one from the perspective of Ari's cat, where you actually see what Shola thinks, his thought process, and him going out and having his own adventure during the day. That takes place during the same time period after the end of book 1's past story, where Ari's novella will take place. So you'll just see a different side of what Ari goes through in some of his days while his cat is having his own adventures. And after that, I'll probably be working on book 3 at the beginning of next year, depending on what happens this year, because I do need a little bit of a break, mostly because I want to further build this world in other aspects. I want to get more novellas out, which is what my contract allows, because I want to have readers to have access to material that I've had to cut away, or just stuff that I think will further enhance the overall world and what it offers without the necessity to have to read them. I don't like that you have to read this novella to get more. I think it's just, here's a novella that adds to your enjoyment and understanding of the world, but if you don't have it, it's not going to take anything away. And I want to find that line to create something just for everyone who's been so supportive of the first book, because it's done very well, again, as I've said. Just want to thank everyone for that, and I hope this clears up some of the questions people had, a better light of some aspect of the industry. I don't want to talk about all of it. And as I go further and make more YouTube videos, I don't want to make my content book industry related as much as, I guess some people choose to, just because I'm already in it. I get so much of it. I'd like to talk more about mythology and history and inspirations and maybe the actual craft itself. I do care a lot about that. I'm self-admittedly, and others have called me a craft whore. and I'd rather go more into the writing craft and something that might give back and help people rather than industry talk. So yeah, thanks everybody for checks this out, and I hope that helps, shed some light on stuff.